So who am I? So my name is David Hirsch. I work for Dynatrace. I'm currently leading the initiatives around our open source program office and our Dynatrace community. A lovely role I decided to call community ecosystem. Yay, creative new terms. In reality, this is an extremely interesting way to mix things up, simply because we're a single product company. And the idea now is to try and open up our community and bring in a lot more of open source influence into the community. So this is something I've been working on for the last 5 years. I kind of started our open source program office, created policies, processes, all the fun stuff like working with legal. And yes, security as well can also be a little entertaining from time to time. And I also dabble in some contributions in the community. So I am a part of the to-do group, which is kind of a umbrella organization below the Linux Foundation, where you can find all of the open source program offices or similarly named organizations that take care of open source within the organizations. I had organized one of the first KCD in Austria. So if you're not aware, this is the Kubernetes Cloud Native Days. Now it's changed names. It's, a lot of going on there. And the least, depends on how you look at it, or most interesting part for me was that I recently, over the last 2 years, decided to get an MBA. And the reason for this actually stemmed from being in the open source community. So after a few years, I had realized that one of the biggest issues for open source communities was, how do we make this sustainable? How do we actually show the business value for our companies? And for others, it was, what should I do? Should I go open source? Should I just develop internally? Or should I find something that's somewhere in between? And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. So really how to, get to the point where you can decide on how you want to act when it comes to a project, to a startup, to whatever you're planning on doing. And let's hop in here. So over the last 2 years, and specifically the last 9 months, I embarked on a fun little journey of writing a thesis. Yay, thesis time. And I realized immediately that this was the topic I wanted to look into. So how do companies innovate? Very broad, yes, I know. Bear with me. I like to set very demanding challenges for myself. And I figured, let's take a few companies within the software industry in general, just to narrow it down slightly. And at the same time, I also looked into a few open source projects. Why not? They're driving the software industry. Let's consider them as if they were companies. And the goal was really to figure out, is there a specific model that works best? Is there a specific model that has, some downsides? Is there a way that you can combine these to make something successful and repeatable? And a lot of this stemmed not only from my work within Dynatrace, but it stemmed also from some of the open source projects that I was involved with. So for example, we started a project called Open Feature, which is now a CNCF incubating project. And we took what we thought was a different approach to things, or at least it was for us. We started this project directly with other vendors in that space. So Open Feature works on feature flagging and standardization. So we reached out to every feature flag vendor and said, hey, would you be interested in creating a standard for the industry? We're like, it's worked for OpenTelemetry. It's helped a lot of people. Why not do something similar for feature flags, which can be extremely painful? And this project ended up being, I would say, quite successful. It's now in its 3.5 year of life, and it's grown to be quite well adopted. We have some adoption from Spotify, from eBay, which I think 2 years ago said they would go 100% open feature within the next 5 years. So yay for us. But I want to hop back to the topic. So yeah. I tried to narrow it down to just these 3 models, and the first one was really, okay, open source. I'm sure everyone here has a good idea of what open source means. So some code that can be used by anyone is freely available, and the point that the legal team and I love to remind everyone about, it should have a license. That's open source. Some people just say GitHub, and they're like, yeah. Yeah, no, sadly it doesn't work. And then the second model was really the internal. Here, for space reasons in the slide, it doesn't say internal development, but I tried to generalize it to internal because there are many different models you can use. You can call it proprietary, internal development. In any case, this is simply meant that all development happens within the organization, or let's say with only specific partners having access. And then finally, there's the hybrid solution, which is taking a little bit of the best of both worlds. So let's go into some of the specifics. So internal development, okay, we've defined it. What are some of the benefits we have that we believe exist from the outside? So yes, we have full control over our code. Great. We can develop whatever we want. We don't have to align with hundreds of stakeholders, or not external stakeholders. It can be deeply integrated in our products, or it can be completely aligned with the way our organization works and how development is structured in general. Challenges, it's all on us as a company, all on us as a team. You know, things are a bit more difficult. You have to dedicate more resources, more time, more energy, and very often you are cut off from all of the innovation that happens in the open. Open source, all right, this one's kind of a no-brainer. You get to develop in the open. You get to use the incredible power that the community has. You know, the rule of more eyes make better software and find more bugs. As well as people are able to test out your project, learn what it does, learn how it works, and figure out if it's something that could be useful for them. Additionally, you don't have to worry about doing everything on your own. You're sharing maintenance, you're sharing code reviews, you're sharing really everything that comes to the project. Some challenges, you do have to align with a larger group of people, so governance as well can be an issue. For example, in our case, open feature, we had a lot of different feature flag vendors involved, and finding an alignment on interest was not exactly straightforward. Everyone had different objectives. You had maybe the main, let's say, vendor in the market, which was avoiding certain things. You had the smaller ones, which wanted to instead go for faster adoption. So aligning all of these different interests can be really complex. And finally, I call this the contribution overhead. And by that, I mean a lot of developers that have not worked in open source are not really used to this whole process. So the fact of having to get approval from people you don't know, you don't work with, at least not directly, to merge something can be kind of daunting. But yeah. So this is how I kind of find it, and then hybrid, as I said, is kind of a mix of this. But I think I got a little bit lost here because while I was writing and doing research, I was like, this is turning out to be a bit too much of a topic. Like I could go on for probably 6 years, and I didn't want to really go for a PhD or a PhD-like master's. So I was like, okay, let's take a step back. Let's figure out what do we actually care about within an open source project, and what do we care about within a company when it comes to development. So I tried to narrow down a few indicators, metrics, call them as you wish. So I came up with these 8. Are they perfect? Definitely not. Do they cover every aspect? Absolutely not. But this was the easiest way I could find to somewhat outline what I wanted to look at. So to understand, hey, which innovation method can work best? So I dove into, some of these are quite obvious: cost, resource, investment. What is this costing you? What do you need to be able to do this? What does the adoption look like? So kind of comparing how different types of models were working. The customer or user satisfaction, this one was a really fun one to gauge because I had to go kind of creative with some of the analysis there, seeing as going through communities from different vendors, going through open source communities, not always really comparable, and not all of them will provide you with all of the information publicly. Operational efficiency. Again here, how does it work within within a company? Do things work well? Do you have to, is there a lot of struggle when it comes to aligning with other parts of the organization? Does it meet the roadmap demands of your customers? Like, this is a lot to think about. Okay, and then scalability, security, speed of innovation. All right, again, this one to quantify, not really possible. This is more of a qualitative measure. And finally, my favorite, trust. So if you've been in the open source community for a while, you know that trust is kind of the main aspect that people love about open source. Everything's there, you can see it, you know where it comes from, and trust is usually quite high. And what happened next? Yeah, I think the best description is really that things got interesting. So I had a fun few months going through what I can only describe as the internet. Going through communities, going through analyst reports, digging into earnings reports from public companies, digging into GitHub repositories to explore kind of how many comments different PRs were receiving, how many really how many issues were opened on a regular basis, and how many people were actively involved in the community. Luckily, there are a lot of tools from the Linux Foundation and from the CNCF, so you have great dashboards which can give you a lot of this information, so you don't have to do what I did and go kind of nuts, but you can easily get this through a dashboard if you want to get a quick overview. I was looking to see if there was something missing, and the results. What do you think the result was? Yeah, no, nothing. Go for it.
So many various combinations, like probably leave us confusing, like so many things to figure out.
Yeah, nothing. The result was nothing. Yeah, I just stood there looking at my screen and figured, wow, I should have chosen a much smaller topic for my thesis. No, I'm just kidding. It wasn't that bad. So the result of all of this was actually the creation of somewhat of a framework. So it evolved from, hey, let's figure out what model works, to let's figure out how you can guide projects, individuals, companies, to figure out what is the best path for them. So do they want to go with one, the other, something in the middle? And bear with me, I know, so many words, sorry. But what the outcome was essentially a few steps that you can think of when you're considering what to do with a project, a product, an idea. And these are aspects that usually software developers don't look into that much. This is something that happens more on the business side. And this is also an evolution of something one of my past managers had created, which was called like an open source business canvas, which is something we would use to evaluate internally. Should we open source this? Is this a good idea? And I tried to put this in and figure out also some additional details. I was like, who could this help the most? And I remember in past conferences during talks getting a lot of questions around, hey, I'm going to start a company. Do you think we should go with an open source model, or should we just do it all proprietary? And to be honest, I hadn't really considered this for many reasons. First of all, never had to deal with the startup life. Happy and sad about it at the same time. And I also figured, why is this a question? You know, you can always, I was like, you can go both routes at the same time. And it's really not that simple. So I tried to define these steps. So first of all, what are your competitive objectives and priorities? Again, is this going to be a project, a product, an integration, an extension that helps your current customers? Will this be something new? Is this something that will generate its own revenue, or will it just make life easier for existing users? I think this was like the starting point. And I guess here you'd say, yeah, it's something that will generate more revenue. Then you'll probably want to consider a hybrid model or something more on the proprietary side because you want to protect your interests. That could be a consideration. Then you'd go into a next step. So you're evaluating the options and the system maturity. Sorry, this is a typo. This is an ecosystem maturity. So is there an existing ecosystem around these type of projects? Is there a CNCF project on this? Is there something open source that already exists that you could simply contribute to? Or is this something brand new where you would be the first? Then we move on to how can you actually achieve any of this? Do you have access to any internal resources? Do you have a team of developers? Do you have a community manager? Do you have infrastructure resources that you can dedicate to this? And figuring out this part can be, in my opinion, a big deciding factor in which route to go. Because if you don't have that many resources, it's probably easier to go for an open source model. You can try to build a community, and you can try to gather more people to your cause if it's a useful and interesting project. Finally, you're going to weigh the security, compliance, and risks. Sorry, the legal team made me put this in. They weren't happy without it, but you're going to have to do this. Are you infringing on any IP, any copyrights, anything that your patent team doesn't really want to be open source? This is a fun conversation to have. My suggestion would be don't have it at this point, have it slightly earlier, because this could really hurt you. Finally, long-term sustainability. Most of the time when people open source a project, they don't really think of the implications and the energy that goes into keeping a community live and what it means to answer questions, PRs, helping people have the confidence to contribute to something. This can be extremely terrifying for a lot of people. And finally, make a decision and just plan the implementation. Just do it. It's the final and easy step, I would say. Are you all still alive? Yeah, oh, good. Just checking. All right, excellent. And this leads to then one additional, I would say, advice or things you can do that will make your life easier. So you can go through all these steps and you'll be like, oh, great, well, duh. There are some more actionable things you can do. So this is for someone really getting started. You've never open sourced. So speak with all of your stakeholders and try to go as high as you can, because there can be a lot of unknowns when it comes to open sourcing, and very often some companies don't have the most permissive policies. Establishing a governance or, again, policies. And here I mean, if you open source a project, if you should establish a governance committee or some form of governance at a certain point. This is a great way to make sure people see the project as truly open. So aim for having people coming from various organizations, independent people, contributors that are just doing this for the fun of it, because it will make your project more credible. If you have 6 people on the governance committee and they all come from the same company, is it really going to be an open project? Not necessarily. Yeah, I see some heads going, no, yeah, feel you. Then allocating resources. I know this sounds so enterprisey, but realistically, even if you contribute to an existing open source project, you're gonna have to dedicate some people and some time, or both. Because projects need maintainers, they need time for the reviews, for the issues, for everything. So you can't just put something out there and, as again, my old manager used to say, throw spaghetti at the wall and expect it to stick. You have to cook it. And the hard part for many enterprises is actually finding a way to make this compatible with their pre-existing development workflows. This is something I experienced firsthand. We had a team, all they were doing was contributing upstream to OpenTelemetry. And finding a way to make this compatible with our, let's call it our value creation guide, which is the name we give it, so was very complex because we have sprints, so we have specific timelines, but that's not really how the open source community works. It can take months for the most simple PR to get merged. So you need to find a way to help the rest of your R&D organization, your software development organization, call it as you will, to understand that you will write the software, you will write the code, but it won't necessarily be merged into the project once it's done. It could take a very long time for that to happen. And finally, for me, this is just good practice: monitor, measure, and reiterate. But that's just my OCD kicking in. So, I see everyone is still breathing, partially. Which one is better? Open source, internal development? The answer is, well, it's not which one is better. It's more, how can you balance them out? There are going to be projects in your company or in your communities which will work really well in a closed model, some which will work really well in an open model, and sometimes you'll just have to combine. A lot of companies out there over the last, I would say mostly decade, have been experimenting so much with coming up with open source projects around which they then build a business model. These are extremely successful because you have a huge user base which can play, experiment, find bugs, find new use cases for you, and at the same time can also contribute to the development. So you are not necessarily the one driving the roadmap, but you are the one helping them implement the changes. At the same time, if you're, let's say, I don't know, a proprietary development-driven company, you may not want to be involved in open source communities, which is a fair statement. From time to time, you want to keep your ideas, let's call them secret or hidden, or you want to just maintain your competitive advantage. And I think this is a nice approach which has worked well for some companies, but it is very resource intensive. In my opinion, something which would be the better or ideal or simpler way to go is to go with a hybrid model. So have kind of the best of both worlds where you have some of the open source input in there. You can build a business model around it, but at the same time, you can take advantage of the power of communities and what has been revealed to be the superpower of open source, which is creating extremely successful and adoptable and usable software. And what can you do to help? Sorry, I think I skipped something. So my suggestion would be experiment as much as possible. You don't have to dive into open source and drown in the amount of comments and PRs and requests coming in, you can also just dip your toe a little bit. You can try out with smaller projects, or you can just try contributing to existing ones. And something which I found extremely useful while creating the open source program office at Dynatrace was find a way to measure the value of the contributions, find a way to measure the value of open source software. This can happen in so many ways. If you're a Linux Foundation member, you even have access to tools where you can throw in an SBOM and it will basically spit out a dollar value of the open source software you're using. This is a great way to justify to your higher levels of management of how much that software is worth and why adding a small investment onto this can, let's say, yield even higher results. And of course, share it back to the community. So if you do see that a model works, if you find structures that work quite well, I think this is something fantastic to share with the rest of the open source community. As I mentioned before, the to-do group is full of resources that help open source program offices or even individuals that are just trying to get open source to become more relevant within their company. I will also be then publishing over the next probably 2 weeks, let's say optimistically, all of this open source, hoping to start more conversations and get also from more, some more, let's say, real world data in there. The information I did manage to collect is what was public, in the sense, I don't know how much information can be worth when it comes to large enterprises that publish the success of their innovation models or, for example, the way they work internally isn't always fully disclosed. And most of the time, for example, the to-do group as well, functions on the Chatham House rules, which means everything you say there does not really get dispersed externally and is usually not attributed to any specific company. So it will kind of be anonymized, which is a pretty nice thing because you can collect feedback, you can get some help from other people, get their opinions, and you don't really have to worry about divulging company-sensitive information. Yeah, so we have 10 minutes left. I did add a Slido, but we're quite few. So if anyone has any questions you want to ask, I would love to dive into some discussions. Yeah, sure.
When you mentioned the hybrid model, you mean like combining the tools together or like using them separately? Let's say we have to use a communications channel. Instead of using Slack, we use Mattermost. Like that can be an example.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of it. So very often, like, there's a lot of additional effort that sometimes is associated with going for open source options. But there's also a lot more flexibility, and sometimes even things like data ownership can be incredible. So you did the example of Mattermost. Same thing could be said for Discourse, could be said for so many other platforms where you will then be the owner of your data, you have direct access, you can develop, I'm not saying whatever you want, but that's kind of up to the resources you're willing to put in. That's part of it. What I mean with hybrid is also, you know, it was mostly intended for like business models as well. So if you build a project, it can be completely open source, and yet there are in fantastic ways you can build a successful business model around it. Examples are, I don't know, Canonical, Red Hat. So many of these companies, they rely on open source technologies, and their business models mostly focus on providing services around expertise to simplify the remaining obstacles of open source, which can be the actual implementation and the setup and all these types of things.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any questions? I have a question for you. Who here is part of the open source organization within your company or something like that? Okay, all right. What are some of the criteria you look at when you either decide to consume open source or to open source something?
In our company, in the end, it's a decision from every business unit because they are responsible for each product. And we don't call it open source office, we provide help with guidelines and stuff. And we also consult to business models if they think about dual licensing or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for us, you mentioned in the caption of your talk the innovation potential. I was a little bit missing this because whenever I tried to push something to open source, we did it, but in the end there was not so much contribution from outside and a lot of discussions. And so I don't know if it was more hindering an innovation process than it would be if we have done it closed source.
Okay, yeah, that's fair enough. Yeah.
I don't know if it's the maturity of our company or it's different in others.
To be honest, I mentioned before Open Feature, which was for us a success, but we also had some other projects. For example, there was Captain, which was a CNCF project, currently still exists. It was a lot more successful in its V1 version. And then when it pivoted to its V2, so where it became this Kubernetes lifecycle toolkit, it kind of flopped. Why? Many reasons. We didn't have an engaged enough community. We didn't put in enough effort to involve the community and keep them interested. And at the same time, it was probably far too niche of a project. So there just wasn't a user base for it.
Yeah.
And all these are things to consider and things that will happen. The question we're often asking ourselves is it actually successful when we do it then as a proprietary product? And most of the time, there isn't the same amount of, let's call it, analysis put into, was this proprietary feature or piece of product successful as it could have been in open source. We tend to always do the opposite. Like, oh, we did it open source, it didn't work. Wow, we should have done it proprietary.
Yeah, but it's quite hard to put on some metrics.
Yeah.
It's unmeasurable and then it's not steerable. So.
Absolutely. In fact, that's like the biggest challenge we had in the past was measuring adoption of our open source projects. I remember we would go to KubeCons and people would walk up to us and say, oh, hey, by the way, we're using this in production. We've been using it for years. And we're like, you've never, ever opened an issue, a pull request, commented, even starred. Like GitHub stars for me, yes, interesting metric could be, but like nothing. And we're like, okay. It's like we were gonna like shut down the project because we thought no one was using this. So that's a really tough part of open source, and that's where I think the community side is really underestimated. Having a good community manager taking care of the project and really reaching out to users, or even someone just doing this part-time as part of their role, can be really helpful.
But I see right now with the economical situation, the movement is more backwards, because our community manager, oh no, we cannot spend any resources for something like that. Yeah.
Which makes this next one really funny. So if you're interested, we're actually hiring someone. But yeah, no, I agree. A lot of companies have, and I think this is something I mentioned also before, have historically underestimated the importance of open source and of communities in general. I would love to blame other parts of the organization, but most of the time this is really on the OSPOs where we fail, or anyone taking care of open source within a company, where we fail to find a way to demonstrate the value. It is very hard, definitely. But for example, there are some metrics which we've managed to collect in the past. One of them that I mentioned before was really the value of the software that your company uses, which is something quite easy to get. There are third-party tools. There's the one from the Linux Foundation as well. That's a great start. One thing we try to do is, for example, I'm often involved if there are CVEs announced, where it's like, okay, how can open source program office help with this? And it's, all right, let's run an analysis on our GitHub repositories. Like, are we using any of this? And it's just giving this additional confirmation, which the other parts of the organization aren't necessarily equipped to handle. Yep.
Yeah, one thing that's helped us is actually just seeing how much engaging with the open source product and the community will deepen our understanding of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, we were deciding between going to, Elastic, the actual company, to get, a large scale search and sort for some of our internal content, and just outsourcing it to them versus building something on open search. And it turned out that, we had to kind of do both, but for different use cases. And so but we started with open search, and it just really helped us understand where we needed to outsource and where we needed to customize. So I think the depth of the open search exercise was very helpful in doing things efficiently financially.
Yeah, that's an awesome example of a hybrid approach, where you can really, like, that's one of the biggest advantages. You can try and figure out what you need and what the project can do. And then if you do need additional services and support, all right, then you don't have to worry immediately about creating the internal knowledge base for this, hiring people with the right skills. You can rely for a shorter or longer time on external companies that provide the service. Yeah. All right. So if there are no other questions, I will say thank you very much to everyone for coming in. I know you saw sponsored session and were scared off, but I'm happy you walked in through the door. Thank you.